Welcome to my channel, where fear lives in every story. If you enjoy dark stories, don't forget to like this video. And comment below where you're watching from, and what time it is for you. Now.
The memories refuse to fade no matter how many years pass or how many times you try to bury them. Mine is from a Wednesday night in March of 2008, when I was 9 years old and still believed that locked doors could keep out anything dangerous. We lived in a 2-bedroom apartment on the 4th floor of a brick building in Newark, New Jersey, one of those places where the hallways always smelled like other people's cooking, and the elevator broke down at least twice a month. My dad worked at a distribution warehouse during the day, loading trucks and managing inventory, while my mom stayed home with me and my baby brother Mateo, who had just turned 8 months old and was in that phase where he drooled on absolutely everything. Our apartment was small, but my mom made it feel warm. With yellow curtains she had sewn herself and family photos covering every inch of wall space in the living room. I shared a room with Mateo at first, but a few months before that night my parents had converted the tiny storage closet at the end of the hallway into a bedroom just for me. It barely fit a twin mattress and a small dresser, but I loved it because it had a door that locked from the inside, a detail that would end up saving my life. My dad had been acting different in the weeks leading up to that night, though at 9 years old I did not have the words to describe what I was sensing. He came home later than usual, sometimes not until after I was already in bed, and I would hear him and my mom talking in hushed, urgent voices in the kitchen. Their conversations had a sharpness to them that made my stomach tight, even when I could not make out the actual words through my bedroom wall. Sometimes he would get phone calls on his cell and walk out onto the balcony to take them, pacing back and forth with his hand pressed against his forehead, like he was trying to hold something inside his skull. I asked my mom once if everything was okay, and she smiled that smile parents use when they are lying to protect you and said everything was fine, that Poppy was just tired from working extra shifts. I wanted to believe her. That Wednesday had been a normal day. School, homework at the kitchen table while my mom made rice and beans, playing peekaboo with Mateo until he laughed so hard he got the hiccups. My dad came home around 7, kissed my forehead, and barely touched his dinner. He kept checking his phone, kept glancing toward the front door like he was expecting someone. I went to bed at 9 like always and locked my little door out of habit. I woke up to the sound of our front door being kicked in. It was not like in the movies, where there is a dramatic crash and then silence. It was loud and fast and followed by shouting, deep male voices yelling things I could not understand at first, words blurring together into something that sounded like violence itself. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, in my ears, behind my eyes. I sat up in my little bed, pressing my back against the wall, and tried to make sense of what was happening on the other side of my locked door. I heard my mom scream, a sound I had never heard her make before, raw and terrified in a way that made her sound like a completely different person. Then my dad's voice, higher than normal, saying something like, "I told you I needed more time," over and over again. More yelling, something heavy hitting the floor. And then Mateo started crying from his crib in my parents' room, that piercing wail that babies make when they are truly frightened. And nobody went to comfort him. Nobody could. I pressed my ear against my bedroom door, trying to understand what was happening without making any noise. Through the thin wood, I could hear at least 3 different voices, maybe 4, and they were not speaking English. They sounded Eastern European, maybe Russian or Ukrainian, with accents that turned their words into something harsh and guttural. One of them kept repeating a number, something like 40,000, and every time he said it my dad would respond in this broken, pleading voice that did not sound like my father at all. I heard my mom crying, asking them not to hurt anyone, promising that they would get the money somehow. One of the men laughed at that, this short, cruel sound that seemed to suck all the air out of the apartment. I wanted to open my door and run to my parents to make sure they were okay, but my body would not move. It was like my muscles had turned to stone, like some ancient survival instinct had taken over, and was screaming at me to stay hidden, to stay silent, to not let them know I existed. so I stayed pressed against that door, barely breathing, while my whole world fell apart on the other side. The violence escalated in waves. I heard what sounded like furniture being overturned, glass breaking, my mother begging in Spanish mixed with English. One of the men shouted at her to shut up, and then there was a sharp sound, like a slap, maybe something worse, followed by a thud and more crying. My dad started yelling then, really yelling, telling them to leave her alone, that she had nothing to do with this, that it was his debt and they should deal with him. Another impact, heavier this time, and my dad made this grunting noise that I still hear sometimes when I close my eyes. Mateo was screaming now, not just crying, but screaming in that way babies do when they sense real danger, and no one was going to him. I wanted so badly to help, to do something, but I was 9 years old, and there were grown men in my apartment hurting my parents, and I did not even have a phone to call for help. My room had no window. It used to be a storage closet, remember? So I could not climb out or signal to anyone. I was trapped in a box at the end of a hallway, listening to my family being terrorized, and all I could do was stay quiet and hope they forgot I existed. That hope shattered when I heard footsteps coming down the hallway toward my door. Heavy footsteps, slow and deliberate, like whoever was walking knew exactly where they were going. My mom started screaming again, different this time. She was screaming my name, telling me to hide, telling me not to open the door no matter what. Her voice cracked into something raw and desperate, and one of the other men must have done something to silence her because she went quiet in the middle of my name. The footsteps stopped right outside my room. I could see the shadow of feet blocking the thin line of light at the bottom of the door. There was a pause, maybe 2 seconds, maybe an eternity, and then the doorknob rattled. Someone was trying to get in. The lock held. That cheap little brass lock that came with the door when my parents converted the closet, and I remember thinking it was never meant to keep anyone out. It was just meant to give a 9-year-old girl some privacy. Now it was the only thing between me and whoever was on the other side. The man on the other side of the door started talking, and his voice was different from the others. Lower, rougher, with a thickness to it that made every word sound like a threat. He spoke in accented English, slow and deliberate, asking who was in here. I did not answer. I could not answer. I had backed myself into the corner farthest from the door, wedged between my dresser and the wall, making myself as small as possible. He asked again, louder this time, and when I still did not respond, he switched to a different tone entirely. He started describing what he was going to do when he got inside. The things he said, I will not repeat them here, not even after all these years. They were things no child should ever hear. Things that painted pictures in my mind I have spent my entire adult life trying to erase. He was enjoying himself. I could hear it in his voice. This sick pleasure he was taking in terrorizing whoever was hiding behind this flimsy door. He did not know I was 9. He did not know I was a little girl clutching her knees to her chest and trying not to cry loud enough for him to hear. Or maybe he did know, and that made it worse. Then he started kicking the door. The first kick made the whole frame shudder, and I watched the wood splinter slightly near the lock. The second kick was harder, and I heard the hinges groan in protest. I was crying now. I could not help it. These silent tears streaming down my face while I bit down on my own hand to keep from screaming. On the third kick, a crack appeared in the door itself, running diagonally from the lock toward the top corner. He was going to get in. The lock was not going to hold. I was going to die in this tiny room that used to make me feel so grown up and independent, and my parents were not going to be able to save me because they were being held down in the living room by men who wanted money my father apparently owed. I thought about Mateo, still crying somewhere in the apartment, and I wondered if anyone would be left to take care of him. I thought about my mom's yellow curtains and the gold star sticker my teacher had given me that week, and how none of it mattered anymore. The man kicked again, and this time the crack widened. I could see a sliver of the hallway light through the damaged wood. And then another voice cut through the chaos, sharp, commanding, furious. Someone was yelling at the man trying to break down my door, yelling in that same foreign language but with an authority that made everything stop. The kicking stopped. The man outside my door said something back, defensive and angry, but the other voice overrode him immediately. I heard footsteps, multiple sets now, and then what sounded like a scuffle in the hallway just feet from where I was hiding. The commanding voice kept repeating something, and even though I did not understand the words, I understood the tone. He was telling the other man to back off. There was more arguing, voices overlapping, and then a single phrase in English that I will never forget as long as I live. The commanding voice said, clear as anything, "There are children here. We do not do this. We are not animals." The silence that followed lasted maybe 5 seconds, but it stretched out like hours in my memory. Then the footsteps retreated back down the hallway, away from my door, and I heard the men gathering in the living room again. I stayed in my corner, not moving, barely breathing, listening to what came next. The tone of the encounter had shifted entirely. The commanding voice, I think he must have been the leader, or at least someone with enough authority to control the others, was speaking to my father now, still angry but more controlled. He said something about this being a warning, about the next time being different, about 40,000 being pocket change compared to what they would take if my father did not pay. My dad's voice came back weak and shaky, promising he would get the money, promising he just needed 2 more weeks. There was a long pause, and then the leader said something I could not quite hear, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps moving toward the front door. They were leaving. I heard the broken front door scrape against the floor as they pulled it partially closed behind them, heard their footsteps echoing down the exterior hallway, heard the stairwell door slam shut. And then there was just the sound of my mother sobbing in the living room, my father groaning in pain, and Mateo still wailing from his crib. All the sounds of a family that had just been shattered into pieces I did not know how to put back together. I do not know how long I stayed in that corner before I finally unlocked my door. It could have been 5 minutes or 30. Time had stopped making sense the moment our front door was kicked in. When I finally stepped into the hallway, I saw my cracked bedroom door hanging crooked on its hinges, saw the gouge marks in the wood where that man had tried to break through. The living room looked like a tornado had torn through it. Our coffee table was overturned, one leg snapped clean off. The TV screen was shattered. My mom's yellow curtains had been ripped down from one side, hanging limp and defeated against the wall. My dad was sitting on the floor with his back against the couch, holding a dish towel to his face that was already soaked through with blood. His left eye was swollen shut and turning purple, and there was a gash above his eyebrow that probably needed stitches but would never get them because we were not going to the hospital. We were not going to the police. I understood that without anyone telling me, even at 9 years old. My mom was kneeling next to him, shaking so hard her teeth were chattering, trying to clean blood off his face while tears streamed down her own. I went to get Mateo from his crib because nobody else could. He was soaked in sweat, his little face red and blotchy from screaming for so long, and when I picked him up he clung to me like I was the only solid thing left in his world. Maybe I was. I carried him into the living room and sat down next to my parents, and the 4 of us just stayed there on the floor for what felt like hours. Nobody talked. There was nothing to say. Eventually, my dad looked at me with his one good eye and said he was sorry, his voice cracking on the word in a way I had never heard before. He said he had made a mistake, that he had gotten involved in something he should not have, that he was going to fix it, and this would never happen again. I wanted to ask what kind of something, wanted to demand answers that made sense of how strangers could kick down our door and hurt my family over money. But I looked at his broken face and my mother's trembling hands and my baby brother's tear-streaked cheeks, and I realized that answers would not change anything. The damage was already done. We moved out of that apartment 2 weeks later, left everything we could not fit in our car, and drove to my aunt's place in Pennsylvania without looking back. My dad never told me exactly what he had been involved in, and I stopped asking after a while. I pieced together fragments over the years, overheard conversations, slips of the tongue, the way certain topics made my parents go quiet and exchange looks loaded with things they would never say out loud. From what I gathered, he had been running some kind of side operation through his warehouse job, moving goods that were not supposed to be moved, skimming money from people who did not take kindly to being skimmed from. He thought he could get away with it long enough to pay off some debts we had, maybe get us into a better apartment, give us a better life. Instead, he nearly got us killed. We stayed with my aunt for almost a year before my parents found jobs, and we could afford our own place again. My dad worked 2 legitimate jobs after that, day shift and night shift, 7 days a week until the circles under his eyes became permanent. He paid back what he owed. I do not know how, and I do not want to know. And those men never came for us again. But the man he used to be, the one who made silly voices when he read me bedtime stories, never fully came back either. I am 26 now, and I still cannot sleep with my bedroom door unlocked. Every apartment I have ever lived in, the first thing I do is check the locks, test the doors, map out where I would hide if someone broke in. I flinch at loud noises. I panic when I hear footsteps in hallways late at night. For years I had nightmares about that cracked door, about the sliver of hallway light widening as the wood gave way, about what would have happened if that other man had not intervened. Sometimes I wonder about him, the one who stopped it. I wonder if he had children of his own, if that is why he drew the line where he did. I wonder if he ever thinks about the little girl he saved without even knowing her name. My therapist says I have made incredible progress, that I have built a life despite carrying this weight, and maybe she is right. But there are still nights when I wake up in the dark, heart pounding, convinced I can hear heavy footsteps coming down the hallway toward my door. And I lie there, barely breathing,